we got a new selection pack, and Duelist Cup is around the corner. So let's go over the best decks that you can be using for this format and for your Duelist Cup grind. And we'll start with the new stuff. Testina. That's it. Yeah, enough said. Okay. Red Dragon Resonators. Okay, so Resonators. Unfortunately, we don't have the horror stuff, and the horror stuff is what really made the Resonator stuff able to, you know, be a coherent strategy. You know, this deck famously got 3 out of 28,000 topping lists in the TCG on regionals and premier events. 3 of them were Resonators, and I think they were mainly because of the Horrors engine. So without the Horrors engine, this deck does not really have resiliency. It kind of dies to one hand trap. It doesn't even really do that much unless you count that it's like the 15th deck that can like King Calamity lock you, which it's like, I mean, cool, yeah, you can Calamity lock, but like it's maybe the 5th best deck at King Calamity locking, which is really sad because Calamity is actually in this deck's archetype as opposed to, you know, TGs or Mannadium or whatever deck that can run Crimson Dragon, because Crimson Dragon is generic. So because of that, any deck can Calamity lock, and this is just not. It's at the very least, I can say that prior to that this is now a deck that has some sort of strategy. Prior to the selection pack, the Resonators didn't do anything. So at least we can put at least we put it above Testina, because Testina literally, I don't think this deck does anything. So this can at least, you know, pretend to do something and pretend that like that King Calamity locking is it's something. Okay, I'm really grasping at straws here. And the last archetype from the new selection pack, the Earthbound Immortals. I mean, man, this what a great selection pack, man. People are so excited to. Man, thank you Konami for giving us a break with the selection packs. We had like 3 straight in a row that were like must pulls, and now this is like, you know, give our gems a break. And Earthbound Immortal, as far as I know about Earthbound Immortal, it's strictly to do with the Runick variant, because I think the Runick variant is probably the best way to play it, because a tale as old as time, you have a deck that has like extenders but doesn't really have a win condition, it isn't really that great at itself. You put it with you just fill the deck with Runick cards, and then, you know, you got something. You have the backbone of a Runick strategy. The issue is Runick. I don't think Runick strategies are that good in Master Duel right now. One, Runick cards are, I mean, they're so heavily limited in Master Duel for some reason. So yeah, any Runick strategy is already gonna feel the consistency loss at that. And then I don't think this is. Okay, so why don't we put the other Runick decks here? So this is worse than the Cherry Runick. Okay, and the Cherry Runick is just a better version of Earthbound Immortal as far as I'm concerned. And like, this also makes Nat Beast, and it also plays better on Maxi. So yeah, it's worse than that. Against the for High Runick, another Runick deck, I think the for Higher Runick has a much higher ceiling than the Earthbound Immortal Runick, since you can draw 4 of 6 cards on like in a single turn. So at least there's that going for it. And then Runick Sprite is just Runick Sprite for higher, except instead of the for higher cards, you have room for more non-engine. And that's really the thing with Runick decks, is that because there's no room for non-engine, it's really hard to go second in this format, since every deck is running 15 plus hand traps, because you need to hand trap the next that we're going to talk about. You need to hand trap the next deck twice in order to be able to play the game, and Runick decks not being able to have room for hand traps is not really ideal in a format like this. So yeah, I'm going to put the Earthbound Immortal Runick deck with the other Runick decks on like a blob right here. And now let's go to some of the best decks in the format. Snake Eyes. So Snake Eyes is the best deck. To no one's surprise, it's the best deck. The only question is, how much better is it than the rest of the format? And it's not tier 0. I don't think people will argue that it's not like that. It is tier 0. It's not like the TG. We're still missing IP. We're still missing Bonfire, and this deck still gets cooked by Maxi a little bit. So it's alright. There's some consistency issues there, but is it in a tier by itself? Like well, okay, so you see I separated with tier 1 and tier 1.5, even though technically you can count those as tier 1, but does it deserve to be separated from the rest of the quote-unquote best decks of the format? And in my opinion, maybe. What would you argue as the next best deck of the format? There's two selections. So one of them is Ran and Despia, and Ran and Despia, I've been testing it since, you know, it's you gotta, the Duelist Cup is coming, you gotta test all the good decks, and Ran and Despia does not feel as good as the Snake Eyes strategy. And one of the primary reasons is because people are on hand traps now. And the best way to actually interact and stop Branded is with hand traps. Just cut them off from accessing the engine entirely. Board breakers or like trying to play into their boards, that's when Branded gets really difficult to deal with because they have an infinite resource grind, plus their interruption is from literally every part of the field possible. You have the back row, the monsters, the grave, your hand, even like occasionally the banish zone. Like there's interruptions everywhere. There's not a single board breaker that deals with it. Half the board breakers don't even work like evenly, can't even be used into Sanctifier most of the time. So the fact that people are on hand traps now and that the most popular and the best deck in the format is playing like maybe the most hand traps out of any deck or the second most, it's just that's what I've noticed when I've been playing the Snake Eyes, is that the Snake Eyes board with Brand Despia, it's alright. Brand is actually pretty adept at playing into their board, especially if they go for the low ceiling ones, like just having an IP and Promethean Princess engraved. That's not the hardest thing to deal with. But what is hard to deal with is the fact that they're sometimes they go into Heat Soul and they draw into, you know, 3 to 4 hand traps along with their board. Like any deck throwing like 3 hand traps at Branded pretty much, you know, does stop them. It's like people are using the same strategy against Snake Eyes as they are against Branded. That's just drawing 2+ hand traps for them and trying to stop them. And unfortunately, Branded does get hit by that strategy a bit more. And then speaking of hand traps, you know, another deck that I don't think it's maybe the best deck, but I think it's belongs in like the higher tier is Mathmech, for the simple reason that I think Mathmech, out of all the top decks, Mathmech, even the Snake Eyes, Mathmech does play the most hand traps, and it's actually also the best deck at playing through hand traps. Literally one circular plays through 3 hand traps by itself. So yeah, in a format where everyone's throwing on hand traps, this deck shines out as the deck that plays the most hand traps and plays through hand traps the best. That's pretty much it. There's not much to say about Mathmech that like most people don't already know by now. Also, hand traps. Superheavy Samurai. So Superheavy Samurai I think is a lot better this round than it was last month, or like when it first came out in the selection pack. Since people aren't heavily focusing on Superheavy Samurai anymore, and by that I mean not everyone's playing Droll. Droll's, I believe, usage rate has like decreased month after month, especially with the release of Snake Eyes, because Droll is not good against Snake Eyes. It's also not good against Branded, and it's like it's okay against Mathmech. It's okay against Mathmech, but you wouldn't put in Droll just to play against Mathmech when you know, Snake Eyes doesn't really care about getting Drolled. In fact, oftentimes Snake Eyes players run Droll just to Droll themselves after they get max seeds to play into max seed. And you know, Branded, if Branded searches once and searches Mana Fusion, you know, nice Droll. And if people are dropping Droll, then you know, Super Heavy has to come back, because Super Heavy doesn't really care about any other hand traps besides Droll and Max C, and I guess Shifter, but we'll get into Shifter later. So if everyone's cutting 3 game turn ending hand traps for the Super Heavy Samurai, and Super Heavy Samurai just gets a lot more, you know, quote unquote free wins going first, since now you're less equipped to deal with this pseudo FDK combo deck. And also this is a deck that also plays 15+ hand traps on its own. So at the very least, it has that going for it too, going second into, you know, all these decks. And Mannadium, I don't know if Mannadium is even should be belonging to tier 1.5 or tier 2. Like, this deck is, I think it's a lot better than its play rate suggests. Just not very many people are playing Mannadium for some reason. I don't quite fully understand it. Like, it maybe, sure, it has the issue of it doesn't have room to run as many hand traps as, you know, Snake Eyes or Mathmech or Super Heavy Samurai, and that feels like it's pretty much it. Because if people are cutting Droll, then Mannadium also gets better because it's another deck that plays through most hand traps pretty fine, just not Droll. And you know, if you're cutting Droll, then this gets better. And about playing the Snake Eyes board is that yes, the best way to handle Snake Eyes is through hand traps, but if there's gonna be a deck that can play through into it and that can play board breaker strategy into Snake Eyes, it's gonna be Mannadium. Branded, I mentioned earlier, can also play board breaker method, but Branded gets hurt a bit more by hand traps than Mannadium does, and especially if people aren't going for the super, you know, high roll boards with multiple synchros and all that stuff, if they're going like Promethean Princess, IP, and like maybe a couple Heat Soul draws, then Mannadium with a board breaker or two is fully capable of playing into that. And obviously when you go first and your opponent doesn't have Droll or Maxi, then Mannadium is also another pseudo FTK deck like Superheavy, except it can run more outs to Maxi. So yeah, maybe we can put it at the top of tier 2 or bottom of tier 1. I can go either way with Mannadium. And I think these are these 4 at least I think are among the best decks. Mannadium, you can argue maybe you can put it in top 5 decks, or you can group it in with the next tier. And speaking of the next tier, so Kashtira I think is the next in terms of Dimension Shifter decks. Okay, so Dimension Shifter is again probably the best hand trap in the game outside of Maxi, and I think Kashtira is the best Dimension Shifter deck. It also has this game-ending floodgate in the extra deck called a Rise Heart. Although I will say this as someone who has played Kashtira in this format, Kashtira is not always an Arise Hard deck. In fact, a lot of times it's not an Arise Hard deck since there's so many hand traps flying around. And unlike the TCG where there's all the main deck Kashtira cards are 3, here because their cards are so limited that oftentimes you can't actually extend past like a hand trap. For example, if they Ash your Theosis, oftentimes that would just prevent you from being able to go into the Rise Heart that turn. Since you can't really go Birth plus in Defender after getting Ashed on Theosis because both those cards are limited in Master Duel. So a lot of times Kashtira plays like a hand trap deck more than like a Rise Heart deck, in that you're trading hand traps with your opponent. And Kashtira does have room to run a lot of hand traps because again, all of its main deck cards are hit, so you know what else are you going to fill the main deck with, right? And when Kashtira runs the hand traps, it has a few advantages over other hand trap strategies in that, again, one of them is Shifter, so it already automatically runs the best hand trap. And 2, the Kashtira monsters themselves are trade okay into hand traps. For example, like if you hand trap Snake Eyes twice or you hand trap Branded twice, there's a potential that they don't really end on anything since you just cut them off their engine. But if you hand trap Kashtira, at the very least they'll have like a Unicorn or a Fender on field, right? Like back to the example of Ashing Theosis, if you Ash Theosis, you're getting 2 cards from your extra deck. One during that turn, then another when you start planning to play on your turn, which decks can play through that, but it's definitely not nothing. And then you combine that Kashtira also runs like 14, 15 plus hand traps on its own. And if you happen to not draw hand traps versus Kashtira, then you have to deal with an Arise Heart. And Arise Heart, if it sticks, it's an FTK against every deck in this format as well. So yeah, then I guess we can talk. Another shifter deck is Vanquis Soul. So you can be argued whether Vanquis Soul or Kashtira is the best of the tier 2 decks. Since gonna be honest, Vanquis Soul feels kind of weird because it doesn't. I've seen Vanquis Soul builds and they don't have as much room to run non-engine as say a Kashtira, for example, right? Because you need to see Raisin to actually play the game. A lot of your deck is focused on consistency to find Raisin. You're running Durandals. I don't know if they're still on the Kashtira package, to be honest, but if they are on the Kashtira package, it's a lot worse because Fender is at 1, so you can add a Rise Heart for a fire attribute, but if you want to add an Earth attribute, then you have to play Scareclaw Clash, which is significantly worse. And the advantage of Vanquis Souls is, I guess, it can draw 2 cards. It can Vanquis Souls Heat Soul you. So you can Heat Soul to try and dig into Shifter, which is it is a somewhat legitimate strategy because Shifter is just that game winning on its own. It also doesn't really care about hand traps because not that it like easy play through or anything, but like hand trap, ceiling of Vanquis Soul is already so low that hand trapping them, it's like, okay, you're preventing them from having one card in hand, like what they do, right? It's not a big deal when Vanquis Soul gets hand trapped unless they really bricked. But yeah, I'm not sure if the ceiling of the deck is enough, because if this doesn't draw into a game-ending hand trap like Shifter or a, you know, the one of limited, there can be only one, then this board doesn't honestly feel that great, and it can be easily played through by a lot of these other decks. And next, Labyrinth. Labyrinth is weird. So Transaction Rollback came out, and no doubt it's a good card for Labyrinth, but it doesn't address fix the problem with Labyrinth, in that it has a terrible Snake Eyes matchup. It's just so bad. The in-engine disruption for Labyrinth are like, they do very little against the Snake Eyes, because what do you have? You have like either a pop on the field or a pop, or like a hand loop one, so you can hand loop them twice potentially. But if you just hand loop the Snake Eyes cards, then they just come back and they can just use them again. So it's like whatever. And then Dimension Barrier, which used to be you know, very oppressive floodgate, is not that good against Snake Eyes. So the whole furniture Labyrinth strategy of like Lab just feels a lot weaker this format, and you know, it's no surprise that with the semi-limited furnitures, people have been going more towards floodgate builds, but floodgate builds have the problem of you're running even less cards for going second, right? The deck already kind of struggles going second because you have to run a bunch of purple cards that are dead going when you lose the coin flip, but then you're running even more so by running the floodgate version. It's like, I don't know about that. And then the rollback, so obviously rollback is good, it's a buff, but without the Arias and only 4 furniture, you can't really play a build that aims to activate traps on your opponent turn 1, so you don't even have that option to help you go second in this format, which, again, going second is always the big issue with Labyrinth. And these next 4 decks that I grouped together, I'll just go through them really quickly. They're Live Twin Sprite, which is a deck you can find on my channel. Tri-Brigade, mainly Tri-Brigade Sprite, which is, again, these are probably the 2 best Sprite variants that you can be playing right now, just because any other version of Sprite is probably somewhere in Rogue. It's just that these 2 have supplementary engines to complement the very limited amount of Sprite monsters you still have left. And then this is the next best Cybers deck, I think, which is Adagnister, which it's just Mathmech but ends on a huge field. And then this is a Lyrillist. I'll get into Lyrillist later, but the main thing about these 4 decks is that these decks are all what I call Mathmech at home. Okay, they all run a hell of a lot of hand traps and non-engine. Like, you can have room to run 15 plus hand traps in all of these. It's just, they're not as good as Mathmech for one reason or another. Maybe it's because their board isn't as good, which, like, in Life Twin Sprite, you get hand trap once. Most of the time, you're just going to end on a pop and a spell trap negate, and then like a couple draws, compared to Super Factorial Terahertz is not a strong of an end board. Or if they're like Adagnister, they're not as good as playing through back row or playing through Disruption, because there's a defined choke point in Adagnister builds, which is like the Dark Infant to get the field spell, whereas there's no choke point to opening Circular, or sometimes they're basically these are like Mathmech but slightly worse for one reason or another. But if you want to play a hand trap pile, these are probably the next best hand trap pile decks you can be playing right now. And Lyrillist, the thing about Lyrillist is so they're level 1s, and Snake Eyes Ash and Snake Eyes Poplar are level 1s. So funnily enough, I just recently learned this, but one Snake Eyes Ash is full Lyrillist combo. as cursed as that sounds. So yeah, do with that information what you will. TGs. So yeah, I guess you can consider TG as another hand trap pile too. Fair. And it can also end on you can try to Calamity Lock, which is, as far as decks that Calamity Lock goes, TG is probably up there as one of the best ones. So you know what, it's fine. Maybe you can put it with these other hand trap pile lists, or with these rogue decks, but hey, yeah, it's probably closer to this, just because it can run the it runs the Snake Eyes and the Dice Bellstar Sinful Spoils engine. So any deck that runs both, can it really be that bad? Nah, it's fine. I just haven't really seen this a lot, but yeah, 12, 15 plus hand traps. It does have a defined choke point, but most people don't know what the choke point is because nobody plays against TGs. It's the level 5 Soul Charge Synchro, by the way. That's what you want to hand trap. But you know, most people don't know that, and they're fire off their hand traps incorrectly, and you know, you have like an Isolde situation where people hand trap the stuff, everything that's not the Isolde for some reason, and then when the Isolde resolves you. So speaking of Isolde, yeah, let's here. So Infernoble Knights. I think Infernoble Knights is a good deck. You could argue that it might even be better than these hand trap piles. Infernoble doesn't have as much room to run hand traps as the other decks, but it does have it is really good going first. Not gonna lie, it plays through hand traps pretty decently. Besides Maxi, but you know, with this Master Duel, you gotta that goes for almost every deck. And yeah, it plays through hand traps, it wins the games going first, and it has an okay amount of room for hand traps going second. This deck is just really hard to play, so I don't really see this as often, and if I see a ladder player running this, chances are they're gonna combo incorrectly most of the time. So it doesn't have a good reputation, but when played properly, Infernoble Knight is a really good deck. It's definitely tier 2 material. Maybe like along with, I think it's better than TGs in my personal opinion. No, this is the Master Duel we're talking about. Okay, this deck, even when you draw Shift or Maxi, the other 3 cards in your hand, it's gonna brick you. I don't suggest playing Fluid. No. It's about Rescue Ace. There's hype about Rescue Ace at the start because it was like, oh, we can do. It's fine even if we don't have Emergency and Preventer, we can still do a Rescue Ace combo using the Snake Eyes stuff. But it's like, do you really want to just use the Snake Eyes stuff to do a Rescue Ace combo instead of doing the full Snake Eyes? I mean, I guess it's fine. Like, I guess if you really want to get Hydrant with original Simple Spoils instead of Jet Synchron, you can do Rescue Ace line. It's just, you're basically running a Snake Eyes deck that runs a bunch of more bricks to add to it to make an end board that's not even necessarily better than the pure Snake Eyes version. So I don't really know about that. I guess it's better than these like Rogue Runick type decks, since you do have room to run hand traps. So immediately because you're running more engine requirements and more bricks in your main deck, yeah, you do have a bit less space. And Stun. As much as I don't want to admit it, Stun is still at play. As long as we have floodgates that are limited, you just run all the different kinds of floodgates and you have enough of them. Even with one border and one Amano Iwado, and like I don't even think they run Amano Iwado anymore. You know what the rogue tech is now? It's now Tribute Summon Majesty Fiend with a Runick. That's what it is. So what, are you gonna limit Majesty Fiend next? Morganite is still at 3. Like, yeah, it's unfortunate, but like all the barrier statues are also legal. Brand Sea of Golgana. I don't know what's the best version of Rogue, or what the best version of Stun is, to be honest. I don't know if Runick Stun is the best, or is it like the fucking full on Fossil Dyna set 5 with like Gold Sea, that Golgana, whatever continuous spell is to protect all your floodgate monsters. I don't know if that's even a better version, but the point is, this deck is going to be still playable despite all the hits, because they didn't ban any of the floodgates, they just limited them. And yeah, dude, you're gonna enjoy it every time you run into this in Duelist Cup. Yeah. Speaking of floodgates, boy, man, now we move on to skill drain on legs. Dinomorphia. So I don't. Dinomorphia is weird. This deck feels unbeatable going first, with the sole exception of that it has a pretty bad matchup versus Branded. It's like one of the worst matchups in the game. It's just not really good. Like, they can do their plays and like not even care about the Rex turn. But against most decks, you go first. You go set 5, including a Frenzy. You're probably gonna win that game. How are you gonna win going second? that's a bit it's a bit tougher question because you do have more copies of Solemn Strike. So unlike other back row decks, at the very least you do have more in archetype tools. So I can see it as a maybe in terms of like I think Dinomorphia is better than Sun. I'll just put it right there. Like if you're gonna run at least Dinomorphia, I think is more consistent than the current state of what Stun is, and although I could be completely wrong, and Dinomorphia could just be completely unviable going second, which depending on the end board, maybe not. But yeah, it does play through Ash better than Labyrinth, since you know it has the in archetype Solemn Strike, so it's actually hard to stop Dinomorphia when it does go first, which is what makes this deck so scary. You can't just win by drawing Ash Spell like you can versus Labyrinth, for example. Tearlaments. Oh, we got a new secret pack. The Tearlaments pack is back, and well, it's not back. It's here, and Tearlaments is it's in a weird spot. I'm gonna put it in like tier 2 because it's a very popular deck. People do play it a lot. People do find success with it. It's just it's just underwhelming. In terms of non-engine slots, it doesn't have as much room to run non-engine as these piles do. I ran like a bare bones build and I could just about fit into 12 hand traps, which is okay, but 12 hand traps isn't consistent enough to open 2 consistently. In fact, more often than not, you're going to open only 1 if you play 12 hand traps. So it's not enough really room right there, and then people aren't playing as many Bestials, and you know, starting your Diggle to 1, so you at least don't have to worry about Bestials as much as you would normally, and its worst matchups. Its worst matchup is like not really much of a thing anymore. It's still capable of, it's pretty good going first. Yeah, it's just an alright deck. It's alright at going first, it's alright at it makes an alright board, it's alright going second. I wouldn't get Q with it, I wouldn't run stuff like the Revolution Synchron stuff, since we don't really unlike the TC, we don't really have many field spells, and the Purple Rhino is limited, so the Ancient Fairy Dragon stuff you can go into with the Revolution Synchron is not really that worth it. There's also not really that great, no Chaos River, so no great level 8 single to go into either. And the Diabellstar stuff is like, honestly, if you want to run Diabellstar stuff just to make it curious to play in like Tearlaments, like just play the punk stuff and make Zombie Vampire. Zombie Vampire is like better than doing Diabellstar just to make it curious for tier. Like, you already have one card, because Kid Kyle is legal, you already have one card combos that can lead you to your entire board, so like why would you want to add all the extra bricks that aren't necessarily even good mills into your deck, and that just do not help you that much going second. So, yeah, it's solid, maybe lower end of tier 2. Exosister, dude, this is like, I think Exosister is arguably the worst shifter deck. I'm sorry. It's, first of all, there's no reason to play, in my opinion, there's almost no reason to play Exosisters over Kashtira. I think Kashtira is just Exosister in every way but better. So Exosister loses hard to hand traps, loses to Maxi. Its main play locks you into Exosister, so you don't have the threat of making Zeus going second as an Xyz deck, which that in itself is a huge problem. Again, out of all these shifter decks, this is the one that gets hit the hardest by hand traps. Yes, even Flu. Flu has a way, in archetype way, to dodge at least Impermanent Veiler with the quick play, Advent of Avenger. Exosister, oftentimes you can literally just imperm their Caspatel, or hand trap their Xyz, and then they don't end on like anything. They have to like hard draw their traps, and then the traps don't even work against every deck if you don't manually trigger it. It's just, yeah, and then it's also weak to board breakers if you are on board breakers too. Like, any form of non-engine works against Exosister. It's just, yeah, the only redeeming quality being shifter is not enough, because then it has no reason to be used over other shifter decks, in my opinion. So it's also not even cheap. It's like hella expensive too. So it doesn't even have that going for like potentially Flu does or whatever. No, well, Yeah, we don't have a Baby Noir out of 10. That's pretty much it. I ran into a Snake Eyes Pearly deck that went Snake Eyes Ash into Ghost Trick Duelahan, make UDF, and then went full Pearly combo and made a Noir on top of the So Cute boss that they got for free off of the Snake Eyes cards. Don't let me catch you running Snake Eyes Pearly against me, please. So don't let do not bring that shit against me. I don't. No, that's literally the most cursed thing I saw all week. That unironically, maybe that's the best way to play Pearly. Snake Eyes Pearly. Sure, PNS, right? Pearly Snake Eyes. Mikanko. This is gonna also represent Numeron and 8-axis. This is basically imagine just actively wanting to go second this format, like this. Imagine actively wanting to go second against in a format that has Mannadium, Superheavy Samurai, Branded Despia, Snake Eyes, and Mathmech. And then also backrow decks like Dinomorphia and Labyrinth, and decks that can Lamulon. Yeah, unfortunately, this isn't the format for trying to blind second. I'm sorry. This is also not the format for Dragon Links. Yeah, so there's one niche that Dragon Link has, which is that if we're in a format where Bystials are good, then Dragon Links are good because Dragon Link plays the most Bystials. Because it has to, because it's its engine. Unfortunately, we're not in that format right now. We're in a fire format, and it is good against the next best deck, which is Brand Despia, and it is good against Mathmech. It's also not good against Super Heavy Samurai. And it's also not good against most of these rogue decks. So you're like rolling the die on or flipping a coin on whether like fourth of your deck is actually good against the matchup or not. And the Diabellstar Dragon Link build, don't run the I don't think the Diabellstar Simple Spoils Dragon Link build is good at all. Like running the level 1 Fire Guard Dragon as an -2 extender, so it's I don't even know if it's better than Pearly or not. You could argue whether Dragon Link or Pearly out of the 2 hit decks is the better one, but yeah, this is Rika Sonavalon. I'm putting this here because I've saw on Master Duel meta there's a lot more people playing Rika for some reason, and with good reason. Not that the meta really changed or anything, it's just that when Rika goes first, it often wins because it sets up an FTK board, and when it goes second, it depends on drawing non-engine like every other deck. It just doesn't have very much non-engine, so I'm not sure quite what the appeal of Rika Sonavalon in particular is out of all the other decks. It's not like it has particularly room. Not like it has room for a particularly high amount of non-engine or anything, and yeah, I guess you can put it better as like a rogue deck or better than these. There's not much to say about Rika. I know I've been talking about Rika for a while, but this has been the same deck it has been for months on end. Nothing has really changed about Rika, so it's always floating somewhere around tier 2 rogue status, in my opinion, unless you're playing against Europeans, in which case it moves up a tier. And Sword Soul. This is the definition of a rogue deck. It's just the definition of a rogue-like deck. Okay, so we'll put it here. Is it better than Stun? I think Sword Soul in the vacuum is a better deck than Stun. It's probably not going to do as well as Stun, though, because Stun is better at making your opponent not play the game than Sword Soul is at making your opponent not play the game. We'll say that. And this is pretty much it. What the format is looking like going to Duelist Cup, in my opinion. Now, please let me know if you think I've left off some decks that are worth mentioning, or if a deck is not listed on here, please type in the comments, ask me questions about them. Chances are, if I didn't mention a deck here, it's probably because it's just going to be residing somewhere around in Rogue or the lower Rogue. So, for example, I didn't put Sky Striker here, in case you're wondering. Sky Striker, I'll just put it in Rogue here. I'll put it near the bottom of Rogue. That's where it is. If Marin says, Sally Mangrave, all of these decks, I'm putting them in in Rogue. Unchained, by the way, we didn't get the Unchained support. We didn't even get the secret back update with Unchained. So what even the hell is this pack? This pack produced like 2 mid to bottom of Rogue decks plus one of the worst decks in the entire game, and it doesn't even have the Unchained card. So Unchained, if you want to ask me about one Unchained, it's also near the bottom of Rogue, or like I would honestly put it here without the new support. But yeah, let me know again. Let me know what you think, and thank you for watching.